The massive viewing screen in the Galactic Council chamber showed the same grim picture it had displayed for the past 3 days. Red markers spread across the star map like a disease, each one representing another system that had fallen to the Zephyrian Empire. The alien representatives sat in their crystalline chairs, their various forms of communication creating a low hum of worry that filled the chamber. Captain Jake Morrison stood near the back of the room, his human uniform looking plain and simple compared to the elaborate ceremonial dress of the other species. He watched as Counselor Zerath, a being made of living crystal that sparkled with internal light, gestured toward the display with one of his many arms. "The situation grows worse by the hour," Zerath said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The Zephyrians have taken the Altair system completely. Their ships move faster than we predicted, and their weapons cut through our defenses like they are made of paper." Commander Lisa Park stood beside Morrison, her tablet showing the same depressing numbers. She had been Earth's military attaché for 2 years, but this was the first real crisis she had faced. The other species had always treated humans like helpful children, patting them on the head and giving them simple tasks while the adults handled the important work. "What about the Vorthan fleet?" asked Ambassador Krell, whose spider-like form clicked nervously on his seat. "They have the strongest plasma cannons in the galaxy." "Gone," replied General Thex, the Altarian military commander whose blue skin had turned pale with stress. "The Zephyrians destroyed them in less than an hour. Their adaptive shields learned to counter our energy weapons too quickly. Nothing we throw at them works for more than a few minutes." Morrison felt Park shift beside him. He knew she was thinking the same thing he was. The aliens had been fighting this war like a chess game, moving their pieces carefully and following ancient rules of engagement. But the Zephyrians were playing a different game entirely. "Perhaps," Zerath said slowly, his crystalline head turning toward the human delegation, "it would be wise for Earth to withdraw its ships to safer space. This conflict has moved beyond what your species can handle." Morrison stepped forward. "With respect, Counselor, our ships are ready to fight." A sound that might have been laughter came from several of the alien representatives. Ambassador Yex, whose tentacles waved in what Morrison had learned was amusement, spoke up. "Captain Morrison, your species has been part of our alliance for only 5 years. Your weapons are kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. The Zephyrians have quantum disruptors and energy shields that adapt in real time. What could you possibly do that we cannot?" Park pulled up a tactical display on her tablet. "Our analysis shows patterns in their attack strategies that might be exploitable." "Patterns?" General Thex's 4 eyes focused on her. "Child, we have been studying warfare for 10,000 years. If there were patterns to exploit, we would have found them." Morrison looked at the star map again. The Zephyrians had taken 12 systems in less than a week. Their reptilian commanders were smart, but they were also predictable in a way that the advanced alien species couldn't see. They followed logical attack patterns, used overwhelming force, and expected their enemies to respond with traditional military doctrine. "The Kepler station is their next target," Morrison said. "Intelligence reports show a massive fleet heading there." Counselor Zerath nodded gravely. "Yes. We are assembling our remaining forces to make a stand. The station cannot fall, or they will have a clear path to the core worlds." "We want to be part of that defense," Morrison said. The chamber fell silent. Morrison could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes studying him. Finally, Zerath spoke. "Very well, but you will take position in the rear guard. When the battle begins, stay back and provide support fire only. Do not attempt to engage their main fleet." 3 days later, Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the largest space battle he had ever seen unfold on the main screen. The Kepler station hung in space like a metal flower, its defensive platforms bristling with weapons. Around it, the combined fleets of 5 species formed a defensive wall that looked impressive until you saw what was coming toward them. The Zephyrian fleet was a sight that made even experienced human military officers pause. Hundreds of ships, each one larger than anything Earth had ever built, moved in perfect formation through space. Their hulls were dark and angular, covered in the kind of armor that had turned previous battles into massacres. "All stations report ready," Park said. From her position at the tactical console, "Weapons are loaded and targeting systems are online." Morrison nodded. Around them, the human fleet looked tiny compared to the alien vessels. 27 ships, the largest being the Defiant herself, armed with railguns, missile systems, and what the aliens called primitive chemical explosives. Lieutenant Commander Amy Brooks sat at the sensor station, her fingers dancing over the controls as she tracked the approaching enemy fleet. She had been studying the Zephyrian attack patterns for weeks, looking for something that the alien analysts had missed. "Contact in 30 minutes, she reported. "Their formation is exactly what we predicted." The alien fleet commanders were already positioning their forces according to standard defensive doctrine. Energy shields powered up, plasma cannons charged, and every ship took its assigned position in the battle line. It was textbook perfect, and Morrison knew it was exactly what the Zephyrians expected. "Captain," Brooks said quietly, "I'm seeing the same vulnerability patterns we identified. They're arranging their shields to counter energy weapons, but their formation has gaps that kinetic weapons could exploit." Morrison looked at the display. The Zephyrian ships were magnificent, their adaptive technology a marvel of engineering, but they had been designed to fight enemies who used energy-based weapons and followed predictable tactical doctrines. The alien species had been so advanced for so long that they had forgotten how to think like warriors. The first shots of the battle lit up space with brilliant flashes of energy. The Altarian plasma cannons fired in coordinated volleys, their beams reaching across the void to strike Zephyrian shields. For a moment it looked like the defensive line might hold. Then the enemy shields adapted. Within minutes the plasma beams were being absorbed harmlessly, their energy dispersed across the Zephyrian hull plating. The aliens had built weapons that could learn and adjust to any energy-based attack. "Vorthan heavy cruisers are taking massive damage," Park reported. "Their shields are failing across the line." Morrison watched as the first alien ships began to explode. The Zephyrians moved forward like a dark tide, their formation perfect and their firepower overwhelming. The defensive line started to buckle and bend under the assault. "Sir," Brooks said, her voice tight with tension, "Admiral Stone is requesting all ships to fall back to secondary positions." Admiral Greg Stone commanded the human fleet from his flagship 3 kilometers away. Morrison could see the older man's face on the communication screen, his expression grim but determined. "Jake," Stone said, "the aliens are getting hammered. Their technology isn't working against these Zephyrian adapters. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Morrison looked at his crew. Park was watching the tactical display with the intensity of a predator studying prey. Brooks had found something in the enemy patterns that the aliens had missed. Around the bridge, 27 other human officers waited for orders. The Zephyrians expected to face another enemy that would play by the established rules of galactic warfare. They had no idea what was about to hit them. The alarm bells on New Terra had been ringing for 6 hours straight. Governor Pete Hamilton stood in the emergency command center, watching the orbital displays with growing dread. The Zephyrian fleet had broken through the defenses at Kepler, stationed faster than anyone had predicted, and now they were here, hanging in space above his world like dark storm clouds. Rachel White, the colony's defense coordinator, moved between the control stations with quick, efficient steps. Her staff worked frantically to organize the evacuation of the outer settlements, but everyone knew there wasn't enough time. The Zephyrians would be landing troops within hours. "How many people are still in the northern districts?" Hamilton asked. 40,000 civilians, White replied, her voice steady despite the situation. "Mostly families with children. The transport ships can't get them all out before the enemy reaches the surface." Hamilton closed his eyes for a moment. New Terra was home to 3 million people, most of them farmers and their families who had come here to build a peaceful life far from Earth's crowded cities. They had never expected to face an alien invasion. In orbit above the planet, Captain Morrison watched the enemy fleet deploy for planetary assault. The Zephyrian ships were massive, their hulls opening to reveal thousands of landing craft. The alien invasion force was 10 times larger than anything the human colony could hope to fight. Captain, Commander Park said from her station, we're receiving a transmission from the planet. Governor Hamilton is requesting immediate assistance. Morrison looked at the tactical display. The human fleet was outnumbered 50-1. The Defiant and her sister ships had fought well at Kepler Station, using their kinetic weapons to exploit weaknesses in the Zephyrian formations, but it hadn't been enough to stop the invasion. Put him through, Morrison said. Hamilton's face appeared on the main screen, lined with worry and exhaustion. Behind him, Morrison could see people running through the command center, their voices raised in urgent conversation. Captain Morrison, Hamilton said, they're targeting our civilian areas first, the northern farming districts, the school complexes, the medical centers. They're not even going after our military installations. Morrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Zephyrians were deliberately attacking innocent people to break human morale. It was a tactic that showed they fundamentally misunderstood their enemy. Governor, we're moving to defensive positions around the planet. Hold on as long as you can. Understood, Hamilton replied. Captain, there are children down here. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Defiant in silence. Morrison looked around at his crew. Park's hands were clenched into fists. Lieutenant Commander Brooks was staring at her sensor displays with an expression that Morrison had never seen before. Sir, Brooks said quietly. They just fired on the elementary school in Sector 7. Something changed in the atmosphere of the bridge. Morrison could feel it. Like the air before a thunderstorm, the professional calm that had carried them through the battle at Kepler Station was replaced by something much more dangerous. All ships, Morrison said into his communication device. This is Captain Morrison. The enemy is targeting civilian populations. Children and families are under direct attack. The response from the human fleet was immediate. Every ship captain acknowledged the message, and Morrison could hear the same cold anger in their voices that he felt building in his own chest. On the planet's surface, Marine Colonel Frank Davis was organizing the defense of New Terra's capital city when the first reports came in. The Zephyrian ground forces had landed in the farming districts and were moving through the settlements with systematic brutality. Sir, Sergeant Major Tony Clark said, approaching Davis with a communication tablet. We're getting reports from the northern sectors. The enemy isn't taking prisoners. Davis read the reports in silence. The Zephyrians were destroying everything in their path, targeting schools, hospitals, and residential areas. They seemed to believe that terrorizing the civilian population would make the humans surrender quickly. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Get me Lieutenant Murphy, Davis ordered. Lieutenant Kate Murphy appeared within minutes, her expression grim. She had been coordinating with the civilian evacuation teams, and Davis could see the strain in her eyes. Kate, Davis said, I'm changing our defensive strategy. We're not going to fight a traditional holding action. Sir, the Zephyrians want to break our spirit by attacking innocent people. Instead, they've just made the biggest mistake of their lives. In space, Admiral Stone was receiving similar reports from across the human fleet. The enemy's targeting of civilians had triggered something in the human military that their alien allies had never seen before. Admiral, his communication officer reported, Captain Morrison is requesting permission to implement what he calls unrestricted warfare protocols. Stone knew what that meant. The humans had developed their military doctrine through centuries of fighting their own species, and some of those tactics were considered too brutal for civilized galactic warfare. The alien species had rules about acceptable conduct in battle, concepts of honor and restraint that kept their conflicts from becoming too destructive. The Zephyrians had just broken those rules first. Permission granted, Stone said. Signal all human ships. We are no longer bound by standard engagement protocols. Back on the Defiant, Morrison felt the change sweep through his crew like electricity. Commander Park was already working on new, tactical solutions, her fingers flying over the control panels as she calculated attack vectors that no sane military officer would normally consider. Captain, Park said, I have a firing solution that will work, but it requires us to get much closer to the enemy ships than recommended. How close? Close enough that if we miss, we'll probably ram them. Morrison looked at the display. Park's plan involved using the Defiant's kinetic weapons at point-blank range, trusting the ship's armor to survive the resulting explosions. It was dangerous to the point of being suicidal, but it would punch through the Zephyrian adaptive shields before they could adjust. "Do it," Morrison said. The human fleet began to move in ways that confused both their enemies and their alien allies. Instead of maintaining safe distances and following established battle formations, the human ships dove directly into the enemy fleet like wolves attacking a herd. The first Zephyrian ship to fall was completely unprepared for what hit it. The human cruiser UES Ranger fired its railguns at less than a kilometer distance, sending tungsten projectiles through the enemy's hull like bullets through paper. The Zephyrian shields, designed to adapt to energy weapons, were useless against solid metal moving at tremendous speed. On the planet, Colonel Davis was implementing his own version of unrestricted warfare. His Marines abandoned their defensive positions and began moving through the countryside in small groups, hitting the Zephyrian ground forces with attacks that came from unexpected directions. Sergeant Major Clark led a team of 20 Marines against a Zephyrian armored column that was advancing on a refugee camp. Instead of engaging the enemy vehicles directly, the Marines used improvised explosives to collapse a bridge just as the column was crossing it. "Sir," one of the Marines reported after the attack, "the enemy doesn't seem to understand what we're doing. They keep expecting us to fight them face to face." "That's because they've been fighting civilized opponents," Clark replied. "We're not civilized anymore." The change in human tactics had an immediate effect on the battle. The Zephyrians found themselves facing an enemy that refused to follow the rules of warfare they understood. Human ships rammed enemy vessels when their weapons ran out of ammunition. Human Marines used tactics that their own species had developed during the most brutal periods of Earth's history. Most importantly, the humans fought with an intensity that shocked everyone who witnessed it. They took casualties that would have forced any other species to retreat, but kept attacking with even greater fury. In the command center on New Terra, Governor Hamilton watched the tactical displays with amazement. The human forces were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were winning. The Zephyrian advance had stopped, and in some areas the enemy was actually retreating. "Rachel," he said to his defense coordinator, "what's happening up there?" White looked at her screens, then at Hamilton. "I think," she said slowly, "they just made the humans angry." War Marshal Kizak stood in the command center of his flagship, staring at the tactical displays with growing confusion. The tall reptilian commander had led the Zephyrian Empire to victory in dozens of campaigns, conquering entire star systems with the precision of a master strategist. But something was going wrong with the human campaign, and he could not understand what. "Report," he ordered his tactical officer, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to absolute obedience. "Marshal," the officer replied, his scaled hands moving nervously over the control panel. "We have lost 17 ships in the past 4 hours. The human forces are using tactics we have never encountered before." Kizak looked at the battle recordings. The human ships were fighting like they had lost their minds. They ignored basic principles of space combat, diving directly into Zephyrian formations with no regard for their own safety. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When their shields collapsed, they kept fighting anyway. "These tactics make no sense," Kizak said. "They are throwing away their lives for no strategic advantage." But the numbers told a different story. Despite being outnumbered 10-1, the humans were winning. On Earth, General Sam Martinez had taken command of all human military forces 3 days ago. The veteran officer sat in the war room deep beneath the military headquarters, surrounded by screens showing battles across 3 star systems. What he saw there would have terrified most military commanders, but Martinez smiled grimly. "Status report," he said to his staff. Colonel Janet Ross, his intelligence officer, stepped forward with a tablet full of data. "Sir, our forces have destroyed 41 Zephyrian ships in the past week. We've lost 23 of our own, but the enemy is pulling back from forward positions." "Casualties?" "High, sir, but lower than projected. The enemy seems unable to adapt to our new combat doctrine." Martinez nodded. The human military had thrown away the rulebook and returned to something much older and more dangerous. They were fighting the way their ancestors had fought on Earth, with creativity, desperation, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Back in space, Captain Morrison watched as his crew worked to repair the Defiant's damaged systems. The ship looked like it had been through a meat grinder, her hull scarred with blast marks and her internal systems jury-rigged with spare parts. But she was still fighting. Commander Park approached him with a new tactical plan that made Morrison shake his head in amazement. "Lisa, this is completely insane." "Yes, sir," Park replied with a grin that would have worried their alien allies. "That's why it will work." Her plan involved using the Defiant as bait to lure a Zephyrian battle group into an asteroid field, then using the asteroids themselves as weapons. It required split-second timing and would probably destroy their own ship in the process. "Do it," Morrison said. Dr. Helen Ross, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, was working around the clock to understand why human tactics were so effective against the Zephyrians. Her analysis showed something that explained everything. "Commander A. Chen," she said to the intelligence officer working beside her, "the Zephyrians have been the dominant military force in the galaxy for so long that they've forgotten how to fight against truly desperate enemies." Commander Rick Chen looked up from his own research. "What do you mean?" "Their entire military doctrine is based on overwhelming technological superiority. They expect their enemies to surrender when faced with hopeless odds. They've never fought anyone who gets more dangerous when cornered." Ross pulled up psychological profiles of the Zephyrian command structure. "Look at their response patterns. When their tactics fail, they try the same tactics with more force. They can't adapt to an enemy that changes faster than they can analyze." Meanwhile, in the engineering sections of human ships throughout the fleet, something remarkable was happening. Chief Engineer Anna Lee was working with Lieutenant Bob Turner to modify their weapon systems in ways that violated every safety protocol ever written. "Anna," Turner said, looking at her latest design, "this modification will probably blow up our own ship." "Only if we're unlucky," Lee replied, welding another piece into place. "If we're really unlucky, it'll blow up their ship too." The human ability to improvise and modify their equipment during active combat was something the Zephyrians had never encountered. Their own technology was too sophisticated to allow for field modifications, while human engineers were turning their ships into custom weapons platforms using spare parts and determination. On New Terra, the ground war had turned into something that shocked even the human Marines who were fighting it. Lieutenant Colonel Mary Jones led her troops through the ruins of what had been a peaceful farming community, hunting Zephyrian soldiers who were learning that occupying human territory was much harder than conquering it. Sergeant Alex Thompson crouched behind the wreckage of a burned house, watching a Zephyrian patrol move through the street. The enemy soldiers were heavily armed and protected by personal shields, but they were also predictable. "Corporal Smith," he whispered into his communication device, "are you in position?" Corporal Diana Smith's voice came back from across the street. "Ready, Sergeant," Thompson smiled grimly. The Zephyrians expected human soldiers to fight like the other galactic species, standing their ground and trading shots until one side retreated. Instead, the Marines used tactics that came from humanity's long history of guerrilla warfare. The explosion that followed was heard 3 kilometers away. When the smoke cleared, the Zephyrian patrol was gone, and the human Marines had already moved to their next position. Back in space, the tide of battle was turning in ways that amazed everyone watching. Captain Nick Foster, commanding the cruiser UES Fury, had just completed a maneuver that would be studied in military academies for generations. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "that's the 5th Zephyrian ship we've destroyed using the ramming technique." Foster looked at his battered ship and grinned. The Fury had been shot to pieces, her systems failing one by one, but her crew kept fighting with whatever they had left. When their main weapons failed, they used the ship's engines as weapons. When their shields collapsed, they used debris as projectiles. "Target the next ship," Foster ordered. "We're not done yet." Commander Amy Brooks, now serving as Admiral Stone's tactical advisor, was analyzing the overall pattern of the battle when she made a discovery that changed everything. "Admiral," she said, approaching Stone with excitement in her voice, "I've figured out why we're winning." Stone looked up from the strategic displays. Tell me. The Zephyrians fight like machines, sir. They analyze, plan, execute, and adapt. But humans fight like humans. We use instinct, emotion, and creativity. We make decisions too fast for them to counter. Brooks pulled up a comparison chart showing human and Zephyrian response times. Look at this. When we change tactics, it takes them an average of 23 minutes to develop a counter strategy, but we change tactics every few minutes. Stone studied the data. So we're not just fighting them with different weapons, we're fighting them with different minds. Exactly. And sir, there's something else. The emotional state of human crews in combat seems to actually improve their performance. The angrier they get, the better they fight. This was something completely alien to the Zephyrian understanding of warfare. Their soldiers were trained to remain calm and analytical in battle, following predetermined strategies with mechanical precision. The idea that rage could be a tactical advantage was beyond their comprehension. As the battle continued, the Zephyrians found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to get stronger as the fight progressed. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Human marines who should have retreated kept attacking. Human commanders who should have surrendered kept finding new ways to hurt their enemies. War Marshal Kizak received another casualty report and realized that his empire was facing something unprecedented. For the first time in Zephyrian history, they were losing a war to a technologically inferior enemy. Send a message to the High Command, he ordered. Tell them we need reinforcements. Tell them the humans are not what we expected. But reinforcements would not be enough. The humans had discovered something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. They had learned that sometimes, the fury of a desperate species could overcome any technological advantage. The Proxima Gateway was the most important strategic point in 3-star systems. Whoever controlled it controlled the trade routes that connected dozens of worlds. War Marshal Kizak knew that if he lost the gateway, the Zephyrian Empire would lose the war. He stood on the bridge of his command ship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion, watching as the largest fleet in Zephyrian history assembled around him. 500 warships, each one a masterpiece of military engineering, armed with weapons that could destroy planets. It was enough firepower to conquer half the galaxy. Marshal, his tactical officer reported, the human fleet is approaching. Their numbers are smaller than expected. Kizak looked at the display. The humans had brought everything they had left. 67 ships, most of them damaged from previous battles, led by a battered cruiser that had no business still being in space. It should have been a massacre. They must know they cannot win, Kazak said. Perhaps they come to surrender. But Admiral Jake Morrison, standing on the bridge of the UES Defiant, had not come to surrender. The man who had started this war as a simple captain now commanded the entire human fleet, and his ship showed every scar of the battles they had fought. All ships report ready, Commander Lisa Park announced from her station. The woman who had been his second in command was now his fleet coordinator, and her tactical plans had become the stuff of legend among human forces. Morrison looked around his bridge. Every face showed the same determination. They were outnumbered, 8-1, facing an enemy with superior technology and fresh ships. By every rule of military logic, they should retreat. Instead, they were about to show the galaxy what human fury could accomplish. Signal the fleet, Morrison said. Execute Operation Thunder. What followed was unlike any space battle in galactic history. The human ships did not form defensive lines or attempt to match the Zephyrian formation. Instead, they scattered in all directions, each ship moving independently toward targets that seemed chosen at random. Lieutenant Colonel Mary Jones led the first boarding action from her assault ship. Her Marines, including Sergeant Alex Thompson and Corporal Diana Smith, had volunteered for a mission that everyone knew was suicide. Their job was to capture the Zephyrian command ship by flying directly into its docking bay and fighting their way to the bridge. Remember, Jones told her troops as their ship approached the massive enemy dreadnought, they expect us to fight like civilized soldiers. Show them what humans do when civilization fails. The assault ship UES Hammer crashed through the Zephyrian shields and smashed into the docking bay of the Eternal Dominion. The impact should have killed everyone aboard, but the human Marines stumbled out of the wreckage and began fighting their way through the corridors of the enemy ship. Sergeant Thompson led his squad through passages filled with surprised Zephyrian soldiers. The enemy had sophisticated weapons and armor, but they had never faced humans in close combat. The Marines fought with a combination of high-tech equipment and primitive hand-to-hand techniques that left the Zephyrians completely confused. "They fight like animals," one Zephyrian officer reported to his commander before Thompson's squad reached his position. Meanwhile, Captain Nick Foster was executing the most dangerous part of the human battle plan. His ship, the UES Fury, was already damaged beyond any hope of repair, but Foster had one last mission to complete. "All crew to escape pods," he ordered. "I'm taking her in alone." "Sir," his tactical officer protested, "that's suicide." "No," Foster replied, watching the largest Zephyrian battleship grow bigger on his screen. "That's victory." The Fury accelerated to ramming speed, her damaged engines pushed far beyond their safety limits. Foster sat alone on the bridge, guiding his ship toward the enemy vessel with the precision of a surgeon and the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. The collision between the Fury and the Zephyrian battleship created an explosion that was visible from 3 star systems away. Both ships were destroyed instantly, but the psychological effect on the enemy fleet was devastating. Dr. Helen Ross, monitoring the battle from the command center on Earth, watched the tactical displays with fascination. Her analysis of Zephyrian psychology was proving correct in ways that amazed even her. "Commander Chen," she said to her colleague, "look at their formation. They're starting to panic." Rick Chen studied the enemy fleet movements. "You're right. They're pulling back from engagements they should be winning easily. The Zephyrians have never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice everything for victory," Ross explained. "Their entire military philosophy is based on preserving their forces while defeating the enemy. They literally cannot understand what they're seeing." On the Eternal Dominion, War Marshal Kizak was learning this lesson firsthand. Lieutenant Colonel Jones and her Marines had fought their way to within 2 decks of the bridge, leaving a trail of destruction that defied belief. "How are they still advancing?" Kizak demanded of his security chief. "They have taken casualties that should have broken any military unit." "Marshal," the security chief replied, his voice shaking, "they do not seem to care about casualties. When one of them falls, the others fight harder." Kizak stared at the security reports. The human Marines were outnumbered 50-1 inside his own ship, but they were winning. They fought with a ferocity that his soldiers could not match, using tactics that seemed designed by madmen. Corporal Diana Smith kicked down the door to the ship's main computer core and began placing explosive charges with the casual efficiency of someone performing routine maintenance. Behind her, Sergeant Thompson held off an entire company of Zephyrian soldiers with nothing but his rifle and an attitude that suggested he was enjoying himself. "Diana," Thompson called over the sound of weapons fire. "How much longer?" 30 seconds, she replied, connecting the last wire. "Then this whole section of the ship goes boom." "Make it 20, Thompson said, firing at another group of enemy soldiers. "I'm running out of ammunition." Smith grinned and cut the timer short. The explosion that followed knocked out the Eternal Dominion's primary navigation systems and left the massive ship drifting helplessly through space. Commander Amy Brooks, coordinating the battle from Admiral Stone's flagship, watched as the human fleet continued to tear apart the enemy formation using tactics that violated every principle of space warfare. "Admiral," she reported, "the Zephyrian fleet is breaking apart. They're trying to retreat, but our ships are pursuing individual targets." Stone looked at the display. The human ships were behaving like a pack of wolves, chasing down enemy vessels that were trying to escape. It was not civilized warfare, but it was devastatingly effective. "Sir," Brooks continued, "I'm receiving surrender signals from multiple Zephyrian ships." Stone paused. In all of galactic history, no one had ever forced the Zephyrian Empire to surrender. They were the conquerors, the unstoppable force that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. "Patch me through to the enemy." "Command ship," Stone ordered. War Marshal Kizak's face appeared on the main screen, his reptilian features showing an expression that Stone had never seen on a Zephyrian before. Fear. "Admiral Stone," Kizak said, his voice carefully controlled. "I wish to discuss terms." "The terms are simple," Stone replied. "Complete withdrawal from all human space and occupied systems, reparations for damages, and a formal apology to the families of every civilian your forces killed." Kezak was silent for a long moment. Around him, his bridge crew waited for his response. The war marshal who had conquered dozens of worlds was about to surrender to a species that had been part of galactic civilization for only 5 years. "Agreed," Kizak said finally. The transmission ended, leaving Stone's bridge in stunned silence. Then someone began to cheer, and the sound spread throughout the ship and across the entire human fleet. Governor Pete Hamilton received the news while standing in the ruins of New Terra's capital city. The colony that had been attacked by the Zephyrian Empire was already beginning to rebuild, but the scars of the invasion would remain for generations. "Rachel," he said to his defense coordinator, "did you ever think we would win?" Rachel White looked at the tactical reports one more time, then shook her head. "No, Pete, but I don't think winning was ever the point." "What do you mean?" "We were never trying to prove we were stronger than the Zephyrians," White explained. "We were trying to prove we were more dangerous." The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy within hours. The species that had been dismissed as primitive newcomers had defeated the most powerful empire in known space. But more importantly, they had done it in a way that changed how every alien species viewed warfare. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant, looking out at the wreckage of the largest space battle in galactic history. His ship had survived, barely, and his crew had proven that sometimes fury was more powerful than technology. "Captain," Commander Park said, approaching with a message tablet, "we're receiving congratulations from the Galactic Council." Morrison read the message and smiled grimly. The alien species were praising humanity's victory, but he could read between the lines. They were also slightly afraid of what they had witnessed. "Lisa," he said, "I don't think the galaxy will ever underestimate humans again." Park looked out at the stars, where human ships were helping to rescue survivors from both fleets. "Maybe. That's not such a bad thing, sir." Morrison nodded. The war was over, but its effects would last forever. Humanity had taken its place among the galactic powers not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through something much more fundamental. They had shown the galaxy that sometimes when everything is on the line, fury matters more than firepower.